So Dash is a hero from Arcane Rising in the game Flesh and Blood. And today we're going to be looking at the list that I've been using recently, that I recently played at a ProQuest. And this is going to be mostly centered around some pretty key things about Dash. If you're interested in the written guide for this deck, that's going to be a little bit more concise because I will be talking pretty much off script. If you're interested in a more thoughtful write-up on the deck, it is available on my Patreon for the Inventor, Extraordinaire, and above tiers. So if that interests you at all, that would be something you could check out, and also something you could use as like a sideboard guide at any sort of official event, if it falls within the rules. To the best of my understanding, it does. But yeah, so Dash is a hero that has both a young and an adult version, if this is their first time seeing the hero. So she's from Arcane Rising, and her ability says that you get to start the game with the Mechanologist item with cost 2 or less in play. So items are basically forms of permanence that will sit on the board and do not basically leave unless if they're destroyed for some reason. But specifically a Mechanologist item. So Dash plays mostly like an engine deck in CC, at least this version right here. This version's can be focused around her weapon, which is the Plasma Barrel Pistol. Something worth noting about the Plasma Barrel Pistol is that you can load a steam counter on it, and then at any point throughout the game, it doesn't even have to be the same turn, you can remove the steam counter and you can attack for 2. Something that's worth noting is that the action does not say once per turn to attack. So it may seem sort of confusing coming from Flesh and Blood, where all weapons do attack for once outside of maybe like Dawnblade, but it is basically like a Dawnblade. As long as you have Go Again, you can reload and shoot the pistol if you have the given resources. So that's going to be a pretty important factor of this deck. So this deck is trying to accumulate an engine most of the time, not all the time, but pretty consistently you're going to be looking to getting your pistol items on the field, because your pistol items will actually increase not only the amount of times you can shoot with your pistol a turn, but also the amount of damage it does every single time it fires. So pretty much every single game you'll be starting with this item in place. So it's a 2-cost Mechanologist item. So you can tutor it with Dash at the start of the game. And it's called Induction Chamber. So you pay 1, you put a steam counter on it if there's no steam counters, and it gets Go Again. And then a once per turn attack reaction, you remove the steam counter that you loaded onto it, and target Mechanologist pistol gains Go Again. The really common line is you will fire the pistol for 2, and then in the reaction step, you will use your Induction Chamber to give it Go Again, and then you can reload the pistol and you can shoot it one more time. So almost every turn with just 3 resources, you can shoot twice, so 4 damage off of a blue every single turn is pretty good value early game. And then what will happen is that our end game engine that we're trying to assemble is 2 induction chambers. So with that, you would be able to shoot 3 times in 1 turn, because it's a once per turn action, so you can't use the same one multiple turns. So normally I just tap them to indicate they've been used for the turn, and then so you can do it once, shoot again, give it Go Again one more time, and shoot one more time, so you can shoot 3 times. And then the other item that we're going to try to get on the field is called Plasma Purifier. Same concept, you load a counter on it for 1 resource. Once per turn action, you remove the steam counter, and target Mechanologist pistol you control gains +1 attack until the end of turn. Worth noting, it does not say the next attack, it just says your pistol, so it's not just a buff to the next attack you'll be doing, it's every attack afterwards. So late game, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get all 4 of these items on the field, and then just pitching blues, not even attacking with attack action cards. We can activate both of these, give our pistol +2 until end of turn. So it comes in for 4. We can shoot once, Go Again, shoot twice, Go Again, shoot 3 times, and you do 12 damage, just like that. So that is kind of the end game goal of this version of Dash. There are aggressive versions as well that I've also played on the channel. If you're interested in finding those, I can also do a deck tech on that at some point in the future. So the question is, how do you get to that point, right? What is the strategy up until that like pivotal moment where you now have control because your weapon just outclasses everything else in the game? So there's a few ways that you can do it. Also, actually, really quickly before we get into that, another card worth noting. We'll go through all the individual cards, but this is pretty important to understanding the deck's game plan. Is High Octane. So High Octane says whenever you boost a card this turn, you gain 1 action point, draw a card, and go again. The draw card is only when you play the card. It's not an effect that happens every time you boost. It's just the High Octane will draw 1 card when it's resolved. So action points are basically sort of like go again, except they can stack. So if you play this, and let's say you boost maybe twice, and both times they hit, you refund your action point from the go again on the boost mechanic, where you banish the top card of your library, and if it's another Mechanologist card, then it gets go again. And then you also net 1 action point because High Octane gives you 1 more. So that's actually pretty important, right? Because we just talked about how the pistol can shoot multiple times, so you can boost a couple times with High Octane, and then you can fire that many times afterwards, even more if you have induction chambers out. And where that really gets important is mid to late game, after you've assembled, let's say, plasma purifiers. Now all of a sudden every pistol shot shoots for 4, so you can play maybe, let's say, you've already loaded these on a previous turn, so you don't even need to pay for them. There's already a counter on plasma pistol, because remember, you can load counters and then you can remove them at any point throughout the game. They don't expire, so that's really nice too. On an off turn, you can just sort of set up and load things. So maybe you get this, and maybe you play like a red boost card, a yellow boost card, and so you've already pushed a bunch of damage, and now you just have a blue, and now like, so you have like 3 action points, and on a blue you can shoot the pistol 3 more times for 12. So you can already see how this can like start to break the ceiling on like 20 or 30 damage turns. We also run 1 copy of Toma Fiendal, where you pay 1 and draw 2. If it's from your arsenal, you get a life for each card in your hand after that, which is nice. But what's more important is that on High Octane turns, this card doesn't have go again. So normally this would be your only action, but with High Octane you have extra action points, so you can actually set up an arsenal, get the High Octane late game with the items out, and then you can boost once, like use an action point and use Toma Fiendal and like have no downside, and then you get more cards to boost and more resources to shoot the pistol a bunch of times, and then you're like definitely probably pushing like 25-30 damage, something crazy like that. So that is the end goal of the deck. So the goal of the deck is sort of playing a mid-range value game throughout the early turns, and then sort of transitioning into like this unstoppable engine deck that just outvalues pretty much every other thing you could think of in the game, pretty much. I would say Dash probably has one of the strongest late games in Fab, probably. There's definitely probably some contention there, but it's pretty hard to beat that when your blue count is all of a sudden now turning into 12 damage, and we're only running 2 of each just for consistency, and wanting to sort of maximize resources. If you run 3 of each, you could hypothetically do 20 damage a turn with just blues, but it's a little bit too cost heavy, and it starts to reach a point of diminishing returns. So 2 and 2 is what most of us agree upon is pretty clean in terms of accessibility of getting the cards out, and then like how many resources versus how much damage. The cost sort of is a little bit more economic with just 2 and 2. You don't get as much value pushing 3rd copies of either card, especially Induction Chamber. So yeah, so moving into how do you actually set this up? So we've already kind of talked about that a little bit, but all of the Mechanologist cards actually block for 3. You won't find a card in this deck that doesn't block for 3, outside of Toma Fiendal, which blocks for 2, and then any of the actual items themselves, which unfortunately don't have block values, which will be relevant at some point in terms of sideboarding. So early game, you are mostly just trying to block out and trying to filter to find your items either in your hand to play, or with Spark of Genius, where you can actually tutor for them, which is a dash specialization, non-attack. You pay double X and you search for an item card, Mechanologist item card. With cost X, you put it in the arena. If you boosted, you do draw a card, sometimes relevant. So like we have Teklovossen, and you can go pay 0 on Spark of Genius and find Teklovossen or Signal Jammer, these 0 cost items. But if you put in 4 resources, you can go get any of the pistol items or Tekla Pounder, which is also in our sideboard. That's kind of your goal of the deck, right? You're going to be trying to preserve your life total as much as you can by blocking out damage. maybe you can start trying to chip things away by just pistoling for 2, go again, pistol again off of a blue. So that way you can sort of block for 9 and deal 4 back. You're putting out 13 points of value a turn in terms of blocking and attacking. And throughout the course of the game, that's like okay, but obviously it's a little bit behind rate. But once you start getting the pistol items out, then all of a sudden that like increases exponentially. And more importantly, at that point in the game, your opponent's going to start to run out of gas. They're going to be running into a lot of their blues that they pitched early on. But the difference is Dash actually wants to go to that point in the game because once you have all of your blues, you actually are stronger than before, assuming you have your pistol items out, which is an interesting spot to be in, whereas most decks get weaker with a high blue count later on in the game. Dash actually becomes stronger, assuming that you've managed to get the pistol items out. Because of this, I actually really advise against boosting early in the game. There are videos on my channel you can go watch where I decide to boost for some reason, maybe to try to swing a little bit of tempo or get like a nice value play, and I'll boost a pistol item. And this deck is incredibly weak, at least this version, this current build. If you do not get all 4 pistol items on the field, it's just the nature of the non-boost aggro version of it. It's so centered around these items that if you're not able to get them, it's actually a massive drawback. So do not boost early. You want to see all of your deck first, and you probably want to see your generics. You need to be careful because you will have to run generics in the pistol mid-range version. That's something you do not encounter in the boost aggro list, but for this list specifically, we do run Command and Conquer and Toma Fiendal and D-React, so you have to be really careful. You have a lot of targets you don't want to hit with the mechanic of boost, so I highly advise against that. So that's going to be your game plan. Your game plan is going to be prioritizing your life total, probably playing reds when you see them. You can just, the nice thing too is that you don't even have to boost, right? So like let's say you have blue throttle in your hand and you really want to play it. You can just keep a 2-card hand and just like put a counter on pistol and then just like throw throttle, and it's fine. You don't have to attack with the pistol afterwards, right? Or if you've already loaded them on a previous turn, you can like you can remove your counter and shoot the pistol, remove your counter, shoot the induction chamber. You can pitch a blue and put a counter back on the pistol and then just play throttle without boosting. So that part's not really necessary, right? We're not trying to rush down our opponent's life total. We're trying to play the slow, grindy game. So there's no incentive for you to like burn through your deck really quickly to push damage immediately when you're fine playing the long game. So that's probably my advice for how you should be playing this. So let's cover equipment real quick. So the standard loadout for most games is going to be Arcanite Skullcap. Unfortunately, Dash's Mechanologist Headpiece Physiotronic Model I will cover, but I just don't think it's as strong as Skullcap in terms of the value you'll get throughout most games. It blocking for 3 is really enough. I've rarely used Arcane Barrier on Skullcap, but block 3 turns out in Fab is pretty good. You're going to be running Tekla Foundry Heart, which is pretty standard. You're actually probably never really going to use the effect of it, unless if you're pivoting to a more aggressive build, or if you are being forced to push damage and really try to close the game out. Sometimes it can be useful, but it's also here to block for 3, which is just a testament to how good blocking equipment is in Flesh and Blood, and just how good Battle Worn is, which is kind of unfortunate. I kind of wish more things maybe had Temper or had Blade Break to make things a little bit more interesting, but we're totally fine having like a Battle Worn 2 that still has an ability that's useful throughout the game, even though it does come at the cost of reducing your deck size. And once again, you should be really careful using this early game, because when you flip over 2 cards, you could hit generics and get nothing back. You could only hit 1 generic, now you just like hurt your deck for no reason. Just go neutral. Or the worst case scenario, you banish like a pistol item or like a high octane, or you banish like Tome as well. Like these cards that you need to close out the game, so you need to be really careful. In terms of playing out this deck, I wouldn't be boosting, I wouldn't be using that effect unless if like you're going to lose, unless if you do it, you're gonna like completely lose tempo for the rest of the game and never be able to recover. Or like, but ideally it's when you've already gone through the deck, you've played out all your generics, your pistol items are all in the field, you have like Toma Fiendal in your arsenal, and you like know where your high octanes are, right? So that's probably like when you have the green light to safely do it. Now, of course, like every game is different, and I can't really make like an authoritative judgment on that. You would have to feel it out in your own games, and I often risk it too in this version. Like, I'll even boost early games sometimes, and normally regret it, but sometimes it is like the best call for what you have to do, and you just have to accept the variance of like, okay, maybe I just absolutely brick on the thing I'm going to banish, but it seems important for what I need to do right now. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And then there's Goliath Gauntlet. Goliath Gauntlet is much better in the aggressive version. It's less, well, it's tough. There's actually a pretty interesting trade-off. So on surface value, it's less important here because we're not trying to play an aggressive game plan. However, we get to run Command and Conquer, and Command and Conquer for 8 is absolutely crazy. It's such a strong card. It's not as good into Starvo, but it's very important into things like Chain, or especially into the new versions of Lexi that are actually shaping up to be very strong. Yuki Lee's list not only did really well at the Pro Tour, but it's also been played by locals, and I got absolutely smashed at the Pro Quest where I brought this deck against that version of like her version of Lexi. So you need to be really careful about that too. So just Command and Conquer is a really strong card, and the effect is just so important. Just hitting a card like in your opponent's arsenal, which normally is going to be a higher priority target for your opponent, and then it is also just like, yeah, reducing their hand size by 1, unless if they give you cards for it, which is just, it's so good. So Goliath Gauntlet is really here for Command and Conquer value. It's probably the only thing I buff with Goliath Gauntlet, unless if for some reason I never had a chance to use it and like all 3 Command and Conquers are gone, and then, you know, we'll figure it out. It can also work with the card like Payload, right? If you need to close the game out, because you could activate this before you open the chain, so that way you're able to not close the chain, or else Payload will never gain Dominate, and then you just play like a 1 cost, so like Zipper Hit or 0 to 60. Even T-Bone is useful. High Speed Impact is also a possibility, and then you play the Payload, and the Payload then meets the condition of Goliath Gauntlet, which has been activated, so then that comes in for 8 with Dominate, and you know, if your opponent's low enough, like that's enough to win the game in a lot of instances. So you can also use it on that if, for instance, like in a certain matchup, like into Starvo, you're not like bringing Command and Conquer anymore because of Crown of Seeds, then that's probably like your next best like use for it. Also on Overloop, it's okay, but you know, we're really starting to go low there. I guess also Combustible Courier. If you can get up to the breakpoint of 4 on the blue, we do run the blue just because we actually are trying to decrease the number of non-attacks so that you can actually sideboard out Spark of Genius and Toma Fiendal on the Chain, and then Chain can't play Invert Existence. So that's pretty sick, actually. Pretty intentional. So that's the entire... Oh yeah, and then sorry, also Achilles Accelerator, which is super important for this deck. So instant speed, you can destroy it, gain an action point, activate this only if you boosted this turn. So you can do it for like an extra action point, maybe 1 more pistol shot is what you need to close out the game. Maybe you accidentally hit something on a boost, like a generic, and you absolutely need the action point, or else you probably lose tempo, and you think it's important enough, you can break it and get your action point back. You can actually just do it on Toma Fiendal, so you can do it without High Octane. You can boost a card, play Toma Fiendal, and then break Achilles Accelerator and get an action point. I've done that before, so that's a pretty nice tempo swing. If you're just having problems like finding the High Octane and you need to go off with Toma Fiendal, or you need the life total and then still be able to pressure cards out of your opponent's hand. So that's pretty much most of the case for Achilles. You're into things like Prism, right? You can like break a Spectra and then like reopen the chain, basically. You get an action point back, or if they try to ALS you, you can like boost an attack into the ALS and then you get to pop Achilles, so that's like super cool. But in terms of the other 2 slots, we have Physiotronic Model I has an action. You break it whenever you boost this turn, you draw a card and put a card from your hand on top of your deck, go again. So basically like a filter effect. And then you have Arcane Barrier 2. And the other possible card you can bring in is Null Ring Gloves. So in a wizard, you can actually just get Arcane Barrier 4, just like that, which is pretty nice, and it lets you grind that game out pretty quickly. Into Rune Blades, you can bring Arcane Barrier 2 with Null Rune and Achilles, which is really nice because that lets you pay for Rosetta Thorn, and then it also lets you pay for individual Arcane because it's Arcane Barrier 1 twice. That's really big. That's really big, especially in something like Briar or Chain. It's really important. It was also very important in Viscerai, and Viscerai was a little bit more strong, pre-ban. And then it also lets you break Achilles and not lose, right? Because that was the thing. That's the thing is that let's say you want to like bring Goliath Gauntlet. Problem is like, if you ever missed a boost and you need to keep going, you want to do like a pivot turn with Toma Fiendal, or you even just want to get one more card out of your opponent's hand, and you break that, you're now like kind of signing a deal with the devil, where it's like, if your opponent ever gets tempo back, like you just have to accept that you no longer are able to win the game, because just losing your arcane barrier like that's pretty tough, especially if you're only expecting that to be your one source of arcane barrier. Then that's a pretty big liability, so you have to be really careful with that. So for that reason, a lot of times I do like to bring in Null Ring Glyphs, just because it lets you not only pay for Rosetta Thorn early on, but if for some reason you need to pivot with Achilles, you still are not completely dead to arcane damage. So that is the equipment setup. Pretty simple. Doesn't really change at all. So running through the deck list really quick, we're going to start with the reds. We have Throttle. We're going to have all 9 of those. It's just a really nice value card from the mech pool. 2 for 6 is really nice. Blocks for 3. This can break Heralds into Prism, which is really relevant. It's just a nice card. That's kind of it. You can play it off of a pistol chain. You can boost it late game. It's great. You can even pitch it early on to like load a pistol if you want. And then late game, you get a 2 for a 6, which is really awesome. We already covered Command and Conquer. Probably the best generic attack in the game, I would probably say. It's just unmatched by any other on-hit effects, really. It's just incredible. The fact you also can't play defense reactions is amazing, because a lot of the times opponents like to arsenal defense reactions. So the amount of times that I will like Command and Conquer someone's like Soul Shield or Sink Below or Unmovable, it's so good. Maybe one thing if it destroyed an arsenal, but the fact that you can't play defense reactions either, it's just so hard to deal with, right? And then like if you put Goliath Gauntlet on it, like decks like Lexi either have to like block with like 2 or 3 cards, which basically just doesn't give them a turn, or then they lose like 2 cards out of Arsenal, which also just doesn't give them a turn, so they just kind of lose either way. The Command and Conquer is like so strong into Lexi and a Rhinar. I really like this too, because we get to play Pummel and Rhinar, and then you just make them discard a card, they lose an Arsenal. That's if they say no block. So they block with 2 cards and they lose a card from hand and a card from Arsenal, and then they're left with like a 1-card hand, and you did damage to them too. Command and Conquer is just so good. I wish it was a mech card, because then you could play in the aggro list, and aggro dash would actually probably be better, just because the effect is incredible. We already covered High Octane. This is what enables us to close out the game with additional action points. If you really want into Prism, you can use it to clear additional auras, since the action points are not go again. So when you attack Spectra and the chain, or not even the chain, the attack doesn't resolve. Go again happens at the end of the attack resolution. Sort of, it's weird, but basically it closes, and your attack never has the ability to gain go again. So like on a boost, as an additional cost to play High Speed Impact, you may banish the top card of your deck. If it's a Mechanologist card, High Speed Impact gains go again. Spectra makes it close before it even gains go again. So then you just lose your action point. Sorry, it's really complicated, but yeah. So High Octane lets you basically clear out auras. And then we have High Speed Impact. The Dominate's really not relevant in the Dash, unfortunately. Everything you can boost is a vanilla attack that doesn't do anything, pretty much. So it's just here as a 1 for 4 that blocks for 3. It's just nice value. Payload, really good card from Everfest. They're able to close out a ton of games with it. And on top of all that, the red one's also a 6 power, so you can play in a Prism too. I can't believe this card blocks for 3. Like, it's just super sick. That is something I do appreciate about the mech class, is just all the block 3s. Just really incredible stuff. 0 to 60 we run all 9 of. It's just a 0 cost that boosts, and it comes in for 4 on the red, which is really nice on a break point. It's really great to High Octane, because the cheaper boost cards are much stronger, because you need to keep the resources to pistol. If you're just playing like Throttles on your High Octane turn, then like you don't have any resources to use the pistols, and you didn't need a High Octane. But if you like do 0 to 60 and 0 to 60 and 0 to 60, and the rest of your hand's like blues, and you just maximize the potential of that card. So 0 to 60 is just strong on its own. I'll send something like Payload, just keeps resources tight. We have Induction Chamber. We already covered this. We have Plasma Purifier, the core of the deck. We have Zipper Hit. We run all 9 of these. It's just a 1 for 5. It's just good. Low cost, aggressive card, blocks for 3. yeah, and then moving on to the yellows, we have Tome of Fiendal, which we covered. We have Spark of Genius, which we also covered. That's your tutor. Tome of Fiendal is your setup card for High Octane. It can be played on its own, but it's much weaker in that sort of context. And then we have yellow 0 to 60, yellow zipper hit. Moving on to the blues are entirely filler. We have a really high blue count just because we need to keep things. We need to keep our game plan, which is going to be having that high blue count for late game, so that we are able to pay for all the pistol items, because that's the thing, they do get expensive, right? Shooting the pistol 3 times requires 1 blue on its own, because you'll need to reload every time. You'll need to load both induction chambers, that costs 2. You'll need to load both purifiers, that costs 2. So you're gonna need at least 7, right? So that means you at least need a 3 card hand. And if you have all blues, then you can actually use the additional resources, and you can reload most of the items too. You can like reload them after you use them. So you can like activate Purifier and then reload the counter on it. So next turn you don't need to pay a resource. That's pretty good too if you're trying to close the game out, because then having that high blue count means that the next turn you don't need to use all the resources, and then you can like boost an extra attack, right? And then that like totally guarantees that you have it if your opponent's low. So yeah, we have starting off, we have a blue overloop. It's just an attack that blocks for 3. The blue attacks are kind of useful because when your opponent does get that low, like I said, sometimes the pistols aren't enough, and you just need to throw like 1 boost attack on the chain. And if it just attacks for anything, sometimes it's all you need to get lethal. So yeah, so we're just gonna be running a lot of blue attacks. That's gonna be the main thing you're gonna see. Really no non-attacks, so just because Dash's non-attacks aren't very strong. Also, it does have the benefit of letting us play better in the chain. So we have Overloop, just attacks for 3. If it hits, it goes on the bottom of the deck, but you're not really concerned about that. Blue Throttle is really nice because it comes in on a breakpoint of 4. So late game, if your opponent's at 1, they have to block with 2 cards, and then you probably win. You have Blue High Speed Impact, which is nice because actually the 2 is a bad block for your opponent, but if you boost it, then the next thing you boost against Dominate, so your opponent may think carefully about that. 0 to 60 blue, we already talked about it. It's just a strong card in the deck. Same goes for Zipper Hit. Some interesting inclusions, we were actually running Magnetic Shockwave. So 2 costs for 4, blocks for 3. Defending hero must defend Magnetic Shockwave with X equipments they control, where X is the number of times you have boosted this combat chain. So assuming you don't close the combat chain, sometimes you can spike your opponent's equipment. So that's why we're running T-Bone. T-Bone's a 0 cost for a 1 attack. Horrible. I hate to say that out loud. I really wish T-Bone was on the same curve as 0 to 60. It's pretty much the main reason you don't run it, unfortunately. It's just the attack value is pretty weak and the effect isn't very strong. However, we just run it because a 2 for a 4 is pretty decent, and a 0 for 1 is like okay on high octane turns if it just happens to be in your hand. But on the off chance that the stars like align perfectly and you draw 2 T-Bones, a blue, and Magnetic Shockwave, T-Bone will make your opponent put 1 equipment in front. So assuming that they're not Guardian, which you shouldn't be trying to play this into Guardian, if they have 4 equipment, standard, right? You attack with 1 T-Bone. They have to block with 1 equipment, and you do not close the chain when you do this. So the equipment doesn't reset. You play another T-Bone, they have to block with 2. So now they have 2 available equipments remaining to block with. So then you play Magnetic Shockwave, and you boosted twice, right? Boosted both T-Bones. So they have to block with 2 available equipments, which means that you actually hit all 4 equipments because 2 of them are used to block the T-Bones, and then the last 2 get covered up by Magnetic Shockwave. So double T-Bone and Magnetic will sweep an entire equipment set, which in something like Ranger just absolutely crushes them, and a Ninja is also very good. Runebladed, it can be like so-so, you know, sometimes, I mean, if you hit Tunic and Creepers, it's pretty good. A Chain, if you take Husk and Creepers, also not bad. Yeah, so don't try to get that. Don't sit on these cards and try to pull that off. That's just in here just because they're blues that block for 3, and they have that interaction if for some reason you drew all that perfect hand together. So yeah, don't worry about that. And then Combustible Courier is a 2 attack that when it hits the next boost, this combat chain gets +3. So actually the blue basically represents 5 damage because the 2 attack and then the +3. And then if your opponent wants to block it, they're now blocking a blue attack for 2, which is just probably like bad value. So that's why we run that. So yeah, and then moving on to the sideboard, we have, how many cards do we have? We have 14 cards in the sideboard. I think that might be, I would have to consult with the guide. I think I may have actually dropped an extra card in here. I'm not sure though. But we run the full defense reaction suite because we're trying to play a little bit more controlling, a little bit more grindy. So having cards that block above rate is really important here, just prolonging the game, and also for the effects themselves, because cards like Sink Below can help you dig for a pistol item or for a tutor. Fate for Seeing can also help you dig for a pistol item or for a tutor, or can also help you know what you're about to boost. So sometimes if you Fate for Seeing and you see a bad Mechanologist card you don't care about boosting, then all of a sudden that's an opportunity for you to use the boost early to mid game. So a movable play from Arsenal, it's a 3 for an 8 block. Fate for Seeing is a 0 for 4 that opts 1. Think Below is a 0 for 4 that lets you put a card on the bottom to draw a card. And then moving on over here, we have our sort of items. So we have Signal Jammer, which is a hate card mostly against Wizard and sometimes against Runeblade. It enters with a Steam counter, and then you remove the Steam counter, and then at the beginning of your turn, if it's at 0 Steam counters, you destroy it. So it stays on the field for 2 turns normally, because the wording is weird, but normally it stays for 2 turns. The second turn, when you remove the Steam counter, it's still good for 1 more turn. It's when you get to the next turn and you go to remove a Steam counter and there are no Steam counters, that's when it breaks. And your opponent cannot play more than 1 non-attack action each turn. So that's really big in the Kano, right? They literally can't play 2 cards, really, because they don't have any attacks. So Kano can't play 2 cards. Decks like Runeblades can't play multiple non-attacks. That's really important into Briar. For Briar's entire ability is based around playing 2 non-attacks in 1 turn. She can't do that. So into Briar, it's very useful. In a Chain, it's a little bit less useful. Into Viscerai, it's like, okay, you can sort of dampen them a little bit, but not by much. But into Briar and into Kano, they're pretty solid. They also pitch for 3, which is really good into decks like that. Decks that want to deal arcane damage, specifically Wizard, right? So like into Wizard, it's also nice because not only is this a hate card, it pitches for 3, which is really useful for paying for Arcane Barrier. And we have Tekla Powder, which if you're familiar with the Blitz list at all, a great card. It enters with 3 Steam counters. First time you boost a turn, you remove a Steam counter, and that attack gets +2. So 6 damage over the course of 3 turns. So yeah, that's the entire deck. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very briefly cover the strategy and the overall idea of what you want to be doing into certain decks. So starting with Guardian. Something about Guardian to keep in mind is that Guardian is normally on some sort of fatigue plan. And what I mean by that is that what helps Guardian is that as the game goes on, they're naturally pretty defensive. Your blue count eventually starts to increase. Your threats get removed throughout the game because the reds you're attacking with are no longer in the game. And then Guardian hits a point where all of a sudden they're able not only to block out pretty efficiently, but they're also able to return damage. And they're probably doing that throughout the game as well, because once you get low, then you have to start giving them cards, and then your turns become weaker. And then as the game grinds out, Guardian is able to pretty much outclass every deck. But what's interesting is recalling what we talked about earlier. Dash wants to reach the blue count. Dash wants to have a deck that's all blues because your weapon is now entirely online and now outclasses everything else in the game. So because of that, Dash is actually an amazing counter into traditional Guardians, not because of any particular card. Some people think that like Pistol is really good into Guardians, but honestly Rampart is really strong because every time you close the chain by loading the counters, because loading the counter to then remove the counter to shoot the gun is a non-attack action. So the chain closes every time, unfortunately. So Rampart is actually really good into Dash. I really wish there was a way that Mechanologist could kill Rampart, but then that match becomes like probably unwinnable for Guardian. But it's not because of that. It's only because the end goal of Guardian directly has a direct conflict with like the end game that Dash wants. Whereas when Guardian wants the game to go long because decks become progressively weaker, Dash wants the game to go later because that's when she becomes stronger. That's a little bit different than like a Guardian matchup, because the thing with the Guardian matchup is that no one really particularly gets stronger. Like no one's cards all of a sudden become better. But in Dash, your pistol your weapon becomes significantly stronger. Instead of attacking for 2 twice, it attacks for 4 3 times. So not only do you reach that end game where Guardian wants to grind things out, you are just in a completely other league compared to them. So because of that, like, it's very, very tough for Guardians if you know what you're doing. So in basically, I'm just going to sort of broadly cover this. You're going to want to take out cards like High Octane because of things like Rampart. I'm not going to lump Old Starvo, or sorry, I catch myself. I don't even see it as Bravo anymore. I just see them all as Starvo. You're going to want to take these. This is not really relevant to Old Bravo, but into something like Oldhim or Starvo where they're going to run Rampart, the additional action points don't really matter because eventually Rampart reaches a critical mass where it just blocks out every single pistol shot, even if they stop paying into it. So that's pretty important to keep in mind. So something like that, you can remove these, but you can also keep in one just as like some way to try to close out the game. Late game, you can like pitch stack it and then like totally have just enough of a turn to get over the Rampart defenses and like close out the game. So you can totally do that. That's one option that I wouldn't rule out. So because of that, you can leave that in, and you can also leave in one tome and just try to have a turn that just goes wide enough late game. Because you're going to at least some, like, honestly, it's just more to help you not go to time because that's pretty difficult for Dash to maintain. You're going to take out something like Teklovossen. You're just kind of looking to mostly block out, preserve life total, dig for the pistol items because they're not going to race you fast enough, but you're also not trying to like race them either. So you're kind of fine being patient. You also want cards that block. So something like Teklovossen isn't as necessary there. You're obviously not going to bring in like Teklo Powders or Signal Jammers. Those are not useful here. Teklo Powders in matchups where you really are concerned about racing your opponent and you're concerned that you're not going to be able to control the game well enough to just not die to like a hyper aggressive deck. But then into Guardian, obviously you want to bring in all these D-reacts, especially Starvo. So that's sort of the change that you'll make. Into these decks that run Crown of Seeds, they can remove their arsenal instant speed, and they're going to be doing it every turn anyway because it's pretty integral to the game plan. So you're going to remove cards like Command and Conquer. And so you're going to run a little bit beyond 62. That's also pretty helpful, right, to deal with fatigue, which can still happen in the Guardian matchup, especially because you will, just kind of run the game pretty late. Do not boost ever in these matchups, like ever. You have to have such a good reason. The only time you should boost is if you're about to win. First of all, because you can't afford to lose any of your generics here. All your generics are D-reacts. They're very, very important to you, or it's tome. You also can never risk losing a pistol item, because if you lose a pistol item, it's going to be so hard because of what we talked about. That's how you win the Guardian matchup. You're just probably not going to be able to come back, and you're probably going to lose. So that's the Guardian matchup. In the Rune Blades, we are going to specifically exclude Chain from this because Chain has an entirely different game plan. In a Rune Blades, you are going to try to be a little bit more tempo based, so probably trying to not block with as many cards, but still block with some. If you really need to take care of on hits or your hand just isn't as good, you're not necessarily going to be playing Boost Dash, but you are going to be boosting a little bit more consistently. Because of that, it will be a risk, right? Because you're going to be running still the generics in here, including a little bit more than you should. So it's just a downside of the deck. The deck honestly isn't as strong as I would like it to be. You will have to accept that portion. Now, we're probably not going to be running or relying on the pistol items, so cards like High Octane are no longer as useful. You're pretty much going to be swapping these items for these new items. Although we're still going to start with Induction Chamber. Just because Induction Chamber is honestly a pretty strong card, and you're able to kind of grind this game out. Still, at some point, you're not playing full Boost Dash. If you were, you would probably start with Teklo Pounder and just go racing right out of the gate. You still can sort of like slow the game down a little bit with defense reactions, with preserving life total, with cards like Tome. Although you're not going to be running Tome here, but hypothetically. So Command and Conquer obviously comes back in really good into Rune Blades, pressuring Arsenal when they have 2 blocks and non-blocks, and they want to keep as many cards as possible. They normally Arsenal pretty good targets, so that's pretty important to keep in mind. And also you're going to be taking out your pistol items and replacing them for the Teklo Pounders so you can boost more aggressively. You're going to be bringing in Signal Jammers to disrupt the multiple non-attacks in one turn. And then you're going to be sideboarding out the unmovables, but you are going to bring in some D-reacts. So you're going to be bringing in these actually, which is pretty interesting. So that's why it is a little bit trickier to deal with this. And then obviously you're going to be bringing in Null Rune Gloves, so you can have Arcane Barrier 2, and then you can use Achilles when you want. You will bring Skullcap, it'll be really important into those breakpoints in this main like Briar. So yeah, so with that you have 1, 2, 4, 7. You have 11 cards in here, which like you're just going to have to run a few extra cards. I mean, if you want to keep the ratios really tight, you actually probably just remove these, and that way you have 13 again, and you run a 61 card deck. But that's like perfectly fine. You're not really as concerned about that. So I would actually probably leave it with that, and just have a couple of D-reacts for those really important breakpoints, especially on Briar, like the Snatch or something like that. And then moving on really quickly into, well, trying to keep as concise as possible for Chain, because Chain is crazy. So for Chain, your goal is to literally never deal damage, ever. You are trying to fatigue Chain. You have the best ability to fatigue Chain out of every single non-guardian hero. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, every card in the deck blocks for 3. You have the ability to remove all non-attack actions so that Chain cannot play Invert Existence, which post Seeds is really important to getting Ursa and also really good at pushing damage. And also really importantly, you have the best way to kill Ursa out of pretty much every other hero I can think of. So the way you kill Ursa is you are just going to, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can either start with Induction Chamber, or you can start with Tekla Pounder. And like turn 1, turn 2, when like Chain is doing no damage, you just save 1 card, you pitch, you put a counter on like Induction Chamber and Pistol, or if you start with Tekla Pounder, you can just like put a counter on Pistol and Induction Chamber. Or there is no Induction Chamber, sorry, you just put a counter on Pistol. And then what happens is you're going to block for 12 every single turn, or you're going to pitch to prevent arcane damage because of that. You're going to bring in Null Rune Gloves here. And you're going to keep on blocking until one of 2 things happens. You find if you're running, so let's say you're running Tekla Pounder, until you find any copy of 0 to 60, right? What you're going to do is you're going to save that card, and you're going to put it in Arsenal. And you're going to keep on blocking for 12 the rest of the game. Matt Rogers talked about this. I'm mostly stealing this from Matt Rogers during like Seeds era Chain. And then what happens is that, so let's say you're running Tekla Pounder, even the blue zipper, or even the blue 0 to 60 works, because you need to deal 6 damage to Ursa in 1 turn. You can play this from Arsenal when Ursa comes out on a 0 card hand, by the way, because you loaded the counter before and 0 to 60 costs nothing. You can play like even a blue 0 to 60 for 2. It gets bumped up to 4 by Tekla Pounder, and then you shoot the pistol and kill Ursa. Now there's a liability because you have to boost there. You could hit a generic and then have to break Achilles, which kind of sucks. So the traditional way is you do Induction Chamber, and then you find red 0 to 60 and put in your arsenal, because that way, with the counters already on, you can use no resources, and you go pistol, go again, so it's been dealt 4 or 2, and then you just play this without boosting for 4 and you kill Ursa. So it's really up to you, whichever of those sounds more intriguing. The Induction Chamber method has a guaranteed failsafe of not being able to whiff, but the Tekla Pounder version allows you to actually, I actually like the Tekla Pounder version more, because it makes any 0 to 60 kill Ursa pretty much. Well, it does, as long as you hit the boost. And that's actually probably more important, because digging specifically for the red 0 to 60 may not happen before they have Ursa. And if you have red 0 to 60, you just play it and you boost, and then it gets bumped up to 6 and it kills Ursa anyway. So yeah, so that's how you're going to do it. So you're going to take out every card. So let's say we're doing Tekla Pounder. You're going to take out every card that does not block. You're going to have no cards in here that don't block for 3. So these are all coming out, even though these like Signal Jammer seems good into Chain, you just don't want it. You'd rather be blocking. For that reason, you're going to bring in all of these defense reactions outside of the unmovables. These come back in just purely to block. They block for, oh no, sorry, they just don't come in because they're non-attacks. So with this, you have, you're also going to remove Spark of Genius. You have 4, 7, 10, 13, 15. So you actually can bring in unmovables here. Even though that does seem kind of weird, you really do need to emphasize not having non-attacks so that you're able to not get inverted by them. Also, Unmovable does actually have a place on bigger Shadow Puppetry turns where they go like Howl into Shadow Puppetry into like Riftbind. They actually do have like one target that comes in for sometimes like 8 or 9 damage. And all of a sudden, Unmovable actually does have a place in the deck. Even on its own, it in a blue pitch now turns 2 cards that normally block for 6 into 7, and that 1 point often really does matter. Even though Chain does kind of go wide with a lot of smaller attacks, you do actually end up with a lot of instances where Howl is a way to try to get through this fatigue matchup, and then all of a sudden Immovable can become pretty important here. With this, you are running, fortunately, we're down to 16, or let's see. Yeah, so you do need to bring 2 cards in here. So I actually still do think that Signal Jammer is fine. And that way you're able to sideboard out all your non-attacks. For some reason you think that the chain isn't going to be on invert. You just bring in either High Octane or Spark of Genius and you take out the Unmovables and the Signal Jammers. But if it feels really important to you to be playing around inverted existence, then that's how I personally would board into this. So that's how you deal with chain. And then moving on to Katsu. So for Katsu, it's going to be a bit tough. You can't really afford to control out the whole game just because like they just go so wide. You're just going to be taking damage every turn, and you can block with your equipment on things like Kodachis, which is probably the best time to use it. Some people may want to use the armor on breakpoints, but just using the armor to turn off 4 Kodachis a turn is like pretty efficient. So into a matchup like this, you're going to obviously be wanting all of the D-reacts minus the immovables. Not as interested in blocking extremely go tall attacks. The biggest thing they're going to play is probably like Surging Strike for 5. If it goes beyond that, then you should have been blocking earlier, unfortunately. Things like Payload just like aren't as useful here because we need to bring in a lot more D-reacts, and there's just better targets for what we want to do with our sideboard. So you can still keep in 1 if you really need to like have the lethal late game, but it's not going to be like as crucial as it will be in some other matchups. So obviously the sparks come back in. You're going to be running these D-reacts here just because you need to have a way to block out these breakpoints from Katsu and also be able to respond to things like Razor Reflex if they're going all in on a card like that. That's going to be really important. You're just going to take out some cards that don't block and cards you don't need. So things like Signal Jammer and Teklovossen are just not going to be as useful here. And then you are going to be trying to commit to the pistol version of the deck, although you will probably have a hard time. They just go so wide. So I wouldn't expect it to be effective, but you're going to have a bad time in the matchup probably. But just go and research Katsu players because I don't think I know the deck well enough, unfortunately. But what I would do is I would go and research the combo lines so that you understand when you're trying to block out and for what purpose. So I actually like to bring in, well, because of what we brought in, we do end up cutting high speed impact just because it's a more aggressive card. We don't really need as much here. And so with this, we have 8, 11, 13. So we have 13 cards out, which is what we're trying to do. Get all the way down to 60, keep it tight, try to find the pistol items as effectively as possible. And then next we have Ranger. So for Ranger, it's just such a toss-up. It's so tough. There's so many different versions of Ranger. You have Yuki's new Ice build, you have Lightning Lexi, you have like Control Lexi. All of these minus Lightning Lexi run Channel Link Frigid, which is absolutely wrecks your pistol items because every time you like remove a counter, that costs an extra 1. Every time you load it costs an extra 1. So like just shooting twice now costs, it's stupid. I'm not even gonna try bother counting it. You just don't bother. You don't care. You wait for channel to go away, then they play another one, then you like definitely lose. This matchup is so tough. They go so wide, they're so aggressive. You have to like run defense reactions, but then they give you frostbites and they have channel, so then you can't even play it on their turn. It's brutal. I think it's a pretty bad matchup for Dash. I have a lot of problems like trying to somehow make it through those matchups. What I have realized is you just pretty much need to take out all your pistol items. You can already see why that's not a bad matchup. If this now requires you to remove all items from your deck, then like, you know, how do you really win? Because we're not playing Boost Dash. So you can remove all of these, take out all of these. If they don't block, it's a huge liability. You don't want Lexi going wide on like 3 of a kind, Rain Razors, who knows what Art of War turn, and all of a sudden you have like 2 items in hand and you're just eating all of it, right? And then there's like those discard effects too, like there's Frostbites and you get caught with the item in hand, you can't even like play it. Like let's say you have like Teklovossen in hand and you eat like a bunch of Frostbites on a Lexi turn and you block with all 9 just to like preserve life total. You go to your turn, you can't even play the Teklovossen because it costs like 1 or 2. Or they like chilling ice vein you and then your items go away. It just sucks. It's just a bad time. That matchup's brutal. Your best option is literally Goliath Gauntlet CNC, and that's how you make it out, hopefully. But you're just gonna have to boost, you're gonna have to be very patient, you're gonna have to block them out. Fatiguing is a possible strategy here, although it's not really that effective. But it's something you could try, because eventually they do run out of razors, they run out of 3 of a kinds, they run out of Art of Wars. You have to keep such a close eye on that kind of stuff. So eventually they can run out of gas, and their arrows eventually get weaker. They become blues that attack for 2 and 3. They can break on a hand by just not drawing any any arrows, or they draw all arrows. So like you're fine blocking this out. You have to be super careful, and you're probably gonna get blown out. So that's just like a warning. The D-reacts you can like leave in, although like I said, they're just like they're so bad. They feel horrendous in this matchup, unfortunately. So at this point, you're at 11 cards. Let's see. I've removed here. We have 5, 8, 11. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You actually can just remove like a few D-reacts, just because it's not like they're just not going to fire as often, unfortunately. Like I really like don't like to say that, right? But it's just probably not going to happen. This matchup is tough. Like I said, just got to keep an eye on things, play tight, preserve your life total. Really, honestly, I'd probably prioritize preserving my life total and just like wait for CNC to come to get you like tempo back in. So after that, we have Warrior. So specifically thinking about maybe something like Dawnblade Dory or Axe Dory, or maybe like Bolton. For Bolton, you're just going to be trying to play aggressive and pressuring their hand, because they can't play on 2 and 3 card hands, because they need to pitch to play a card and charge the soul. So assuming they're on like Raiden or even like Sabers, they just can't really afford to block, and also the cards don't block very efficiently. So you can bring in like cards like Teklo Pounder. I would probably maybe still keep like the D-reacts in, just because it lets you block out a card, but also doesn't let them turn on Bolton, for instance, most of the time. So these are pretty effective here. You can bring in like Teklovossen, because you can set up maybe a more aggressive turn on the back end of a Spark of Genius. You have 8 cards here. You can like remove like Tome, for instance, and probably like High Octanes, because you're not trying to set up a bigger pistol turn. You're just trying to play more of a tempo game. So you can remove that package, and now you're at 12 cards, and you're fine because you're boosting a little bit more often. Now, for instance, if you're, and that's for like Axe Story 2, sort of, although honestly for Axe Story and for Dawnblade Dory, you're actually able to control that game out, because Dawnblade Dory can just get blocked out every turn until you get pistol items, and Axe Story just doesn't do enough damage for you not to eventually get out your engine. So in something like that, you can bring all this sort of stuff in. You can actually leave in Teklovossen, so you can block with like a 3-card hand, turn off Dawnblade or Axes, and then just play that and pass. And then you can set up something nicer. You're going to bring in all the D-reacts here. You can bring the High Octanes back in. You can bring Tone back in. The engine's coming back in, so now we have to find a way to cut 9 more cards. So I actually don't think Command and Conquer is like as strong here. I think in some decks it's better. I think in a like Dorinthia, her arsenal doesn't really matter as often sometimes. There's not really anything that she's really trying to keep in there. And if it is a card that she's trying to keep in there, the fridge is just going to eat it anyway. So you're not really as concerned about that. Like a card like Spill Blood or maybe like Singing Steel Blade, but they're just going to get played immediately. So like trying to bait them into like getting trapped in their arsenal is like not really going to happen that often. So right now we have 7 cards cut. You can go down to 10, remove the high speed impacts, a little bit more of an aggressive card in this matchup. You can sort of play defensive a bit more. And then for the last 3, or maybe 2 if you want, you can maybe just keep 1 payload in just to have that late game guarantee of lethal if you get them low enough. Although if they're playing Valley and Dynamo, or even just Dory in general with the Fridge, it's going to be kind of tough to get them in that spot. And in that matchup, like in a axe story, and just like block the first axe for 3 with a card. You don't really care as much because they're not trying to do like one big attack that's dropping a bunch of reprise. There's going to be playing cards like Blade Runner and stuff, so you can block like the first one for 3, and then the second one for 6 or something, and probably deny their whole turn. Come back with a blue pitch and like attack them with pistols until you find it, or just like take some damage, set up a pistol item, and like keep going. Same kind of goes for Dawnblade Dory. You're going to want to hold stuff as long as you can. So give them the reaction window, and then if they say no reactions, you can say no defense reactions, and then like Dawnblade hits, they don't have go again or something, or they forgot they didn't have a chance to give it go again. Or if they are forced to, right, if you say no blocks and they play like Glint to Quicksilver to give it go again, then you can actually play a defense reaction from your hand and they don't get the reprise effect. So you can like totally deny Dawnblade Dorinthia if you understand how the deck works. Just arsenaling defense reactions and just blowing them out by denying reprise, blocking for 9 on Dawnblade like every turn, and just not letting them ever possibly get a second hit. Even if they have the reprise cards in hand, it's just so hard for them to get like 9. You have to be careful of like the Iron Song determination turns. Like those are tough where it has dominate, and to save your armor for then. And then you'll eventually just get all the pistol items and kill them. So that's how I would play those matchups. Be more aggressive into Bolton because it's a hard matchup. You have a bunch of attack action cards, so you're probably not going to be able to like ever not turn off Bolton if you're blocking his cards from hand. So you can say no blocks a lot of times in that version of the deck, at least into Bolton, and then like try to pressure more of their life total by boosting. So after that we have Prism. Prism's really tough. I haven't really figured this one out with this version. The aggro version, you just go ham, deal damage to them, win the game. This one's tougher because if you go too slow, they just grind you out because of all the auras. But if you try to go too fast, you can just fall behind, and then boosting in this deck is like a really big liability. So I really don't actually have the answer for you. I do know Command and Conquer is really good. Obviously, you can hit like Soul Shield, or you can threaten like Atoma Divinity, but also it pops Phantasms, which is really strong. I have enjoyed running some Teklo Pounders. The biggest problem with this deck is that you're gonna need to use an action point with your pistol to clear an aura at the end of your turn. But if you have an item that directly has a conflict, right? Because it's like one thing, because you're assuming every turn you're gonna pistol them for 2, maybe threaten to clear spectral shields, and then you're gonna clear like an aura on the table because they're probably playing 1 aura a turn. You just need to keep the board clear. That's really important for this matchup. The problem is, if you play an item that eats your action point, so then you can't clear the aura, or if you clear an aura, then you can't play an item. So I actually really don't like running items beyond the starting item in this matchup, even like Teklo Core. So I just like run like 1 pounder, and just like if it happens and you can find it, it's like a nice way to get that like mid game push or maybe that late game push and start to close it out. And so for that reason, you are trying to be a little bit more aggressive, but also being patient and playing slow when there's auras on the table. That's why Induction Chamber is really good in this matchup, because you can threaten and clear Spectrals, and then you can clear an aura. And so when you need to, you can slow down a bit, control the board, and then get that really quick burst of momentum to get back in the game. If you know that they're going to be running Heralds, it's honestly not a bad idea to run these defense reactions, or maybe even like Unmovable here, just to deal with those Heralds. Unlike Rhinar, you don't have as many ways of like fully blocking them out. So it is like a liability for you to keep in mind. Tome is not useful here. High Octane is only mostly here to maybe like pressure life total late game, or if you're really behind on the board to clear auras. I really like High Octane mostly as dealing damage rather than playing catch up. But sometimes it is needed in the matchup, or else you just completely drown out. The current equipment slot's fine. 1 Arcane Barrier on boots is enough. You have to be careful if you ever break them, because Merciful Retribution may threaten to kill you. So you take out all the pistol items. You still need to find 5 more things to remove. Honestly, like even removing just one unmovable is probably enough. Like you're not trying to like protect against every single herald. Even one here is fine, and then just like bringing out, for instance, like Sink Belows, right? Scene is normally a better card, just because it lets you opt, especially in this matchup, you're going to be boosting sometimes. You really need to understand what's on top of your deck. So that's how I would probably side for this matchup. Although it is definitely a work in progress, I do feel like I don't understand it entirely. It's just a complicated deck. In a Brute, if you think they're going to be playing Arc Smash, you just want to assume that they are. You just mind game them. You just don't even play the game. You just start with Teklo Pounder so that it doesn't stay on the board long enough for them to dig for Arc Smash. You play aggressive because they can't block with more than 2 cards a turn, or else they can't pitch to play a card and discard a card as the additional cost, and you just aggro them down, even though it will be harder in this deck. You're going to be running the 0-cost D-Reacts because they can be played from Arsenal if they intimidate your whole hand, and it turns off Barraging Beatdown, right? If they triple intimidate, you can block with 1 card from hand, D-React, and now Barraging Beatdown's off. You can turn off Pulping, which is really important on like a Blood Rush Bella turn or something. You can just break their whole Blood Rush Bella turn. You're going to be running the 0-cost D-Reacts, and you're going to be taking out all the items because of Arc Smash, but also because you just can't get caught with them, right? Like what happens if they like double intimidate you with like 2 Barrage and Beatdowns, they attack, and then like you have like 1 item left in your hand? Well, now you're taking like 12 damage you didn't need to. So for that reason, just take out the items. And so with that, you have 12 cards out, let you boost and not like fatigue yourself. Just play carefully. Know how to use your 0-cost D-Reacts, save them. They're going to be really important for like Barrage and Beatdown or for Pulping. And then just be aggressive in this matchup. You can't go late against them because they just remove so many of your cards you want to block with to preserve your life total, and then they can just Arc Smash you if you're on the traditional control pistol plan. In Kano, you can sort of grind this game out. I would recommend just watching the Arsenal Pass video that recently came out on the new Kano list, so you can understand when to pull the trigger on Arcane Barrier, although keeping your life total at 40 throughout the whole game by running Arcane Barrier 4 is obviously really strong. You need to know how to not overextend your hand, because this is more of like an OTK combo deck now in CC with the Aether Wildfire lines. But obviously all the defense reactions come out. Some can come back in. Signal Jammers will be really good in Kano. You can start with Induction Chamber and bring in Teklo Pounders just as a way to be more aggressive in Kano, because you can threaten Kano's life total pretty easily. And then also this increases your blue count for that same reason. You can bring in Teklo Cord either to pitch for Arcane Barrier or to play on a turn, and then you're able to go even more aggressively on a turn and then have extra resources left over. So with that, you remove 12 cards and you're perfectly fine. With this, you're going to be boosting a little bit more consistently. And if you notice here, you have a much lower mechanologist, or sorry, you have a much lower generic count. You can even remove this and go to 13 cards, and all of a sudden you're pretty comfortable boosting every single turn. Okay, finally, for the mirror. So in the mirror, Dash can't really threaten enough damage to kill you fast enough, and if they're on the boost version, you can actually play the defense reactions and pretty much threaten to fatigue them out. So in this version, I'm pretty comfortable jumping back into the pistol plan. I know for the last few matchups we've actually pivoted out of it, but I think in here you're actually pretty comfortable doing that. So for this, you can bring in all the defense reactions. You can take out the items that don't block for anything, because that'll be pretty important obviously for us. You can maybe bring in 1 unmovable for maybe something like Throttle, or maybe a Command and Conquer. Oh, sorry, that doesn't work. Just kidding. Maybe like a Throttle or a Payload is pretty important, especially something like Payload. That's how I would probably play it. And so now you need cards to remove, although you can run the Tome into the pistol item package, so these are going to come back in. In terms of what to remove from the deck, you're actually just pretty comfortable on this. I would say you could maybe remove something like High Speed Impact. Now you're down to How many cards here? You are now down to, you need to find 3 cards to remove. I mean, this is pretty solid here. You can then start to chip away maybe like payloads. And just keep your deck, I mean, you can keep your deck count above 60 if you would like to. So maybe just remove 1 payload, or you can still keep it in there. Although you probably want to keep some blues to be able to pistol back each turn. You can just cut these, have a 61 card deck after finding Induction Chamber, and then just being able to grind out that game over time. On the aggressive version, you can just block it every single turn. It will be tough since you'll have 3 non-blocks in the game, right? Because you'll have the 3 items, but you'll just have to accept that. Or if you're into the mirror, then you're just going to play really tight. Pistol when you can. Be really careful with the numbers and how much you're trading in terms of damage versus what you're blocking. And that's what I would probably recommend. So I hope this video overall was really useful. I got smashed at the Pro Quest with it. Like, I think that the deck has some pretty big issues. It'd be nice if LSS found a way to sort of ramp up Mechanologist in future sets, although I don't really expect it to happen. I've recently came in the game and I heard people that had a lot of frustration with how strong Mechanologist was, which makes sense. I mean, like, we talked about how there's this idea of like permanent value in the engine, so that is something to keep in mind, right, in Flesh and Blood. That's why, like, I personally have a problem with Prism. It's just because the idea of having permanent value on the board that doesn't remove itself on its own is like problematic. So having something like Dash's items, I totally understand it. But yeah, so I would keep that in mind. It's like a tier 2, 0.5, tier 3 deck right now. This doesn't really have a whole lot of good matchups, and I would just keep that into consideration if you plan on playing it. But the deck is a lot of fun. Obviously, I built my channel around it, and it's just something I enjoy playing. So yeah, thanks for watching.